Okay, so when I was a kid, I wanted to be a famous movie star. That's all I wanted to do. I was so excited about getting out there and being famous and important and popular and having people like me. I was short, and I was always overlooked. People didn't notice me or recognize me. So I had to be loud and obnoxious in order for people to get to know that I even existed. Plus, I lived in Las Cruces, New Mexico, right? It's kind of like, does anything good ever come out of, Nazareth? And there I was in Las Cruces. So I thought, if I'm famous and I'm important, I could beat somebody. My dad worked for public television, and he was the guy. Now, this is before VCRs and DVDs and Bluetooth and Blu-ray, and it was before live stream. We didn't even have the internet, right? No, but there wasn't even such a thing as a DVD player. My dad was the guy at the TV station who would decide which shows they were going to purchase, and then he would buy them, and then he would schedule them on the TV station at the times that he knew that we would be out of school. So he would pick our favorite shows, Sesame Street, Electric Company, and our favorite movies, and we loved black and white movies when I was a kid. And he would put them on TV at the time that he knew we would be home from school. So it was like having my own personal DVD player and my dad at that time, right? Well, one of my favorite actors was Gregory Peck. Has anybody read the book To Kill a Mockingbird? Yeah, right. Gotta watch the movie. It's awesome. Gregory Peck was a really famous movie star in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And my dad invited him to the TV station in Las Cruces, New Mexico, to come and do a fundraising event. And I got to give out the name tags at the event. So I'm getting ready before the event started, and Gregory Peck walks in, and I'm like, oh, my idol. And I had my speech prepared and everything. And I walked up to him, and I said, Mr. Peck, can you tell me how to be a famous movie star like you? I was in high school, and here's my idol, and he's going to get me going, right? Just rubbing shoulders with him, I knew it would take me places. And I had my autograph book held out to him, and he took it from me, and he glanced at me under his glasses, and then he scowled. He started signing it, and he said, "It's not what you think, kid. Do something more important with your life." And he gave me the book back and walked away. Right? I was so crushed. I thought, my hero. What am I to do now? I was so upset and sad. A few years later, when I was in my final year of high school, I was tutoring a young girl who was from a wealthy family, and her grades were really suffering, and her parents wanted her to graduate. So I was tutoring her in math, and one day during our weekly sessions, she comes up to me, and she says, what are you going to do when you get out of high school? I said, I'm going to be famous. I'm going to be a movie star. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to become a lawyer, and then I'm going to conquer Roe versus Wade. I'm going to do that thing, and then I'm going to write books, and then I'm going to get really important. I'm going to travel and see the world. I was telling her all this stuff I was going to do, and she's like, yeah, right. And she says, I don't even want to graduate from high school. I'm only doing this because my parents want me to. The next week, she came back to the session with me, and she told me that she was pregnant. And she said, I don't want to tell my parents, so I'm going to get an abortion. And I had that moment that your speaker yesterday had, when you knew everything rests on your shoulders, right? The life of this child is in your hands. So I did the best I could. I told her about pregnancy centers. I told her child had a life, that her child was a real human being, that she was valuable. And she left the same attitude that she came, with this chip on her shoulders that said, I'm going to do this because my parents, if they found out, would kill me. She came back the next week, and she told me, I had a miscarriage. But I could see in her face she didn't have a miscarriage. I knew she'd had an abortion. I could tell. And she knew that I knew. And when she left, she never came back again. And at that moment, I realized that what Gregory Peck said mattered. Do something more important with your life, kid. And so I did. I started making these movies, right? No, I'm just kidding. So I did. I thought, I'm going to start a pro-life club on my campus, and I did. And when I went to college, I started a pro-life club on my college campus, and it kind of grew from there. And when I was in college, as it grew and grew, I started realizing that the most important thing we could do with our lives is to help other people live better lives. And it really crystallized for me one day when I was speaking at an event like this for a bunch of adults in a conference for people who do religious education. And I'm in my young 20s, and I was really skinny in those skinnier than, I was like about 20 pounds skinnier than I am today, because I didn't have my husband. He's our cook in our family. And I was running down the hallway to go to my talk so that I could speak to people on what I'm going to talk to you about today. And I get in the elevator, there's nobody in there, and I'm like, I'm late for my talk. So I get in, and the doors close, and a big hand comes in to stop the door. And it opens, and this woman gets on. And she looks like she's about 20 years older than me, and she was very large. And the doors close, and it's just me and her, and she's scowling at me. And I said, hello. And, we're going 15 floors up. It's a long ride. And she says, you single people make me sick. I was like, nice to meet you too. And she says, I know why you single women are so skinny. Because at the end of a long, hard day, you come home from work, you go to the fridge, you see what's in it, you get disgusted, and you go to bed. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. Yeah. She said, we married women, at the end of a long, hard day, we come home from work, we go to the bed, we see what's in it, we get disgusted, and we go to the fridge. I don't really have that problem. But I will tell you this. This is where it all crystallized for me. What's missing in our culture on marriage and family and unborn children and sex? Joy. People are missing a joy, a laughter about life because they don't see the beauty in life. They don't know what they're living for. They don't know what their lives are about. They don't see the meaning and purpose and dignity in their own lives. And I'll tell you something. If the people you're speaking to don't see the image of God in themselves, they're not going to see the image of God in an unborn child, no matter how good your science, no matter how good your statistics, no matter how many stories that you've memorized to be able to insert at the right moment. They will not be pro-life because they won't believe it matters. You have to make it matter. And that's what we do at Healing the Culture. We find really clever ways to help people see that it matters. So I'm going to go through a really quick curriculum with you today. I'm going to show you what it is that we do. It's a philosophy of the pro-life movement that comes out of a guy named Father Robert Spitzer. Anybody ever heard of that guy? Yeah, woohoo! Okay, he's on EWTN. He has a show called Spitzer's Universe. And for the past 35 years, he's been articulating a philosophy of the human person to help college students and high school kids understand why they should be pro-life from a much deeper level than they've usually heard before. And it all starts with what we call the 10 universal principles of civilization. I'm going to have you guys, because I can't see the thing, but we're going to go to the first principle. It's called the principle of beneficence. Now, this principle it originated in Jesus, and it teaches that it's better to give yourself away for the good of others than to sacrifice others for the good of yourself. Now, you guys already believe this. That's why you're here. You know that it'll make you far happier and lead to a far more meaningful and powerful existence if you are sacrificing yourself for someone else who is in need, who is vulnerable or small or weak or poor or disenfranchised or unborn or dying. You know that. That's why you're here. But the vast majority of people in this culture have been convinced that living that way is to give up your own life. And if you give up your own life, you're going to be miserable because all there is after that is death. Even Christians, the vast majority of Christians have bought the lie that I need to be powerful and respected and popular and wealthy today. Because if I'm not, I'm doing something wrong or God doesn't love me, right? And that's a miserable existence. And so people are grasping for this idea, this notion of happiness being all about me instead of giving myself away for others. This is a really important principle for us to teach. If we don't get people convinced on this one, you can't teach them any of the other principles because they don't matter. Principles about logic, principles about right and wrong, principles about inalienable rights, they don't care because it doesn't matter. Think about it. If I'm living for myself and the real meaning of life is what I get to have, making myself a god, why would I care about ethics? Right and wrong is just about what's good for me. I don't care about what's good for you. Why would I care about logic? Logic is whatever I want to make it. If I want to make a contradiction, I will if it works for me, right? Why would I care about justice? What about my rights? Right? It all revolves around me. So that principle is really important. It leads to all these other principles. Let me give you an example. The next set of principles are called principles of logic or principles of truth, okay? Or also known as principles of reason. So if you want to convince somebody that an unborn child is a full human person from the moment of fertilization, this next set of principles are really important. And the first one of those principles of logic is called the principle of non-contradiction. You saw that in the video we showed you. We can teach that principle to kids as young as kindergarten, and they understand what a contradiction is by the time we get done with the class with them. We use that video, by the way, in kindergarten and first and second grade classes. This principle teaches that something cannot be and not be at the same time, at the same place, in the same respect, right? So you can't have something that's a square at the same time as being a circle, okay? Not the same thing in the same substance at the same time in the very same place. It either is a square or it's not a square, okay? It can't be both at the same time because the condition of a square is mutually exclusive to the condition of a circle, right? Okay, you can't even think of a square circle in your head. It's impossible. You can try, but you're either going to have a circle on top of a square, or you're going to have half a square with part of a circle, or you're going to be flipping back and forth between them really quickly. But you can't even think of a square circle because they are mutually exclusive conditions. Okay? So not possible to do that. So you can't have a baby not baby at the same time at the same place, depending on who's looking at it. It's illogical, irrational. It doesn't make any sense. Okay? So kids will say, well, who cares if it doesn't? Why should I be logical? Because if you allow things that are irrational or contradictory, then you can't have conversations because everything you say, the opposite is going to be true at the same time, right? And if you can't have conversations, then you can't have community because community is grounded in conversations and people working and talking together. And if you don't have community, you can't have workplaces, you can't have schools, you can't have churches, you can't have government, you can't have laws, you really can't have anything. It will be like vegetables looking at each other. So you need reason, you need logic. But then the old question comes, who cares whether we're vegetables looking at each other? That's why you need the principle of beneficence, right? Because doing good with your life will make you happier. It matters. So then we go to another principle. The third principle of logic, it's the second principle of logic, but the third we're going through today, is called the principle of objective evidence. Okay? Because now the kids will say, okay, so maybe I don't want contradictions, but how do you know whether or not the unborn child is a human being? Well, this principle really helps. It teaches that in order to know what's really real, you need to have, God bless you, you do need that. You need to have God blessing you, right? In order to know what's really real, you need to have evidence that ordinary people, other people of relative intelligence can verify. Okay, you need to have objective evidence. And in fact, there is objective evidence that the unborn child is a full human being from the moment of fertilization, from the moment of sperm-egg fusion. In the 1970s, a French geneticist by the name of Jerome Lejeune, who you may have studied or heard about, discovered the full human genetic code present in an unborn child at the moment of sperm-egg fusion. You've got a full, unique, individual being of human origin from the moment of fertilization. And in fact, most medical textbooks to this day acknowledge that the beginning of a human being's life is fertilization. You really can't deny it unless you just want to deny science, which oftentimes our opponents don't mind doing. You've experienced that, yeah. Okay. So what do? Alternatively, they will acknowledge it's a human being, but they will say it doesn't matter because it's not a human person. What does that mean? What's the difference? Well, there is no difference really, but it's just the way we use the words. Human being is what we are biologically. Okay, so you can define ourselves biologically. A person denotes the moral worth and the legal protectability of a human being. So we refer to you as a human person in law because there is a moral worth protecting in human beings. Okay? So, what's a human person? Well, if you want to know what gives you your moral value and therefore your legal protectability, you need to look at the whole definition of what you are as a human being, not just your biological components. Who are you in your depth, in your core? What are all of the possibilities and powers that you have that can be actualized? And we teach a whole curriculum to help people philosophically understand that the full definition of a human person is any being of human origin that has as its final end, its ultimate goal, the perfection of its biological and transcendent powers. You're not just a biological being. You have transcendent powers as well, and we can prove that philosophically. I won't do it today, but we can prove philosophically that you have powers that go beyond the physical, beyond the material. It's what we call transcendent. You have the ability to be creative. You have the ability to love, to be sacrificial, generous, kind, compassionate, to give of yourself. You have all these abilities to love, if you will, that seem to transcend your biological nature. So much so that you cannot even identify love as a chemical, right? People keep trying. They keep trying. Time magazine keeps trying to figure out whether you can find that biological chemical that is love, and they can't do it. Right? And yet people know love is a really real entity because you know when you have love and you know when you don't. So a human being, the only way to objectively define human beings is to say a human person is any being of human origin, right? It's got to have the biological reality too. Any being of human origin that has as its final end the perfection of its biological and transcendent powers, both of them. And then our opposition says, well, okay, so why do you think an unborn child has that ability? It's just living in the womb doing nothing. Okay? And this is where we get into the next set of principles, the ethical principles. Okay? What about what's right and what's wrong? How do I know what's right to do and what's wrong to do? Is it right to consider an unborn child a full human person or not? And when we know who a person is it right to treat them in certain ways or wrong to treat them in certain ways? So we have to move on to another set of principles. We call these the ethical principles. And the first one, we already kind of did this one. I morphed that with the objective definition. You can move on to the next one. Right there. Okay. You can move on from that one too. Here we go. The first ethical principle, this is the most basic principle of all ethics. Without this one, you can't have any other principle of ethics, right and wrong, right? Non-maleficence, it means do no harm. And it forms the basis because every other ethical principle relies on this one. Okay? Do not kill. Why not? Because it harms somebody. Do not cheat. Why not? Because cheating hurts somebody. Don't steal. Why not? Because stealing hurts somebody. Okay? Don't commit adultery. Why not? Because people get hurt, relationships get hurt, children get hurt. Okay? So don't do it. Even society gets hurt when you do that. Okay? So this is the basic, do no harm. And this principle is really important in our movement because what it says is if you harm an innocent human being in one situation, then you open the door to doing it in any other situation. So don't do it. Do not kill. Don't harm human beings. An unborn child is a full human person from the moment of fertilization, which we've proven biologically and philosophically, so don't harm it. And yet, what did Roe versus Wade do, which eventually had to be overturned? It said, if you're unsure whether or not the unborn is a human person, go ahead and kill it. Right? That's what it did. No wonder it had to be overturned. Okay? So this principle is really important, but you can see how it depends on those principles of logic. How do you know who a human person is? And why should you care? So you need that principle of beneficence. But now it moves to a second principle of ethics, because people will sometimes say, I know you're not supposed to do a harm, but what about in this instance? Or what about in that case? Or what about in these hard cases? Okay? And this is where we need the principle called the ends don't justify the means. Okay? You can't use an evil method to get to a good end. And when we're talking with secular pro-abortion audiences, young people get this, even when they're not pro-life. You don't want to use an evil means to get to a good end, because when you do, you justify things like the Tuskegee Syphilis Project. Do you remember that one? Anybody study that one? Yeah, in Tuskegee, Alabama, a bunch of scientists from the National Health Institute came and wanted to study on this particular population syphilis, because there was no cure. And there was a higher than usual population of African-American males who were infected with syphilis in Tuskegee, Alabama. So that's why they chose that as their study spot. So they gave some of the men placebo drugs and studied them, and some of the men they gave nothing, and they studied them, and their goal was to gather as much information and data as possible so they could come up with this cure. It was a good end that they wanted. But somewhere halfway through the study, somebody else in another part of the world discovered that penicillin was an effective cure against syphilis. These men didn't want to interrupt their study because they were gathering good data that could be useful. So they didn't allow the men to be treated. They didn't even tell them there was a treatment. Right? And as a result, many of the men died from syphilis. They infected their wives with syphilis, and their children got congenital syphilis and ended up with blindness and all kinds of other ailments. All because these scientists wanted the results of their studies and wouldn't let them get treated. A good end did not justify the evil means of forbidding those people from getting treated when a treatment existed. And it became one of the greatest scandals in medical science today. They use that as an example of the ends don't justify the means. So when you're looking at abortion, what we ask our audiences to do is simply be consistent. If you know this is a human being, and you know the purpose of your life is to sacrifice yourself for the good of the other rather than the good of yourself, you know this is a human person, and you know that it's wrong to kill, then you cannot justify the killing for the sake of a good end. You cannot use an evil means to achieve a good end, even if it's saving somebody by discovering a cure for cancer or a cure for Parkinson's or what have you. But then there's a third principle, because this is where we have people who will complain and say, but how do you know for sure that the unborn child at the moment of fertilization has those powers of self-transcendence that we talked about before? So now we need another principle. This is called the principle of full human potential. This principle was articulated by a guy named Bartolomé de las Casas. He was a Spanish Dominican Catholic priest who owned slaves before he was a priest. And then he had an epiphany, right? He lived in the mid-1500s, the time when the Spanish conquistadors were coming to the new Americas and were enslaving the Native Americans and torturing them and even killing them if they resisted being enslaved. And Bartolomé de las Casas realized this was wrong, gave up his slaves, and became a priest, and became one of the most ardent defenders against the conquistadors in that time period. And he used this argument. The conquistadors were saying, the Spaniards were saying, that you could enslave these Native Americans because they were less developed. So therefore, they were not fully human persons. Sound familiar? Yeah, they were less developed in the eyes of the Spaniards. Okay? They had more inferior architecture in the minds of the Spaniards. They had inferior mathematical understanding and architectural understanding and astronomical understandings and religious structures. And so they said these people, therefore, are worth less as human beings and are less persons and can be enslaved. Bartolomé de las Casas said, wait a minute, you can't judge the value of a human being based on the level of development he has currently achieved. You can only judge the value of a human being based on the level of development he could achieve if he reached his highest potential. And he ultimately won. Took many years, but he ultimately won. We're doing the same thing with abortion today. Some years ago, I engaged in a debate against an abortionist by the name of Dr. Malcolm Potts at the University of Berkeley, California. Anybody from there right now? Anybody from the University of Berkeley, California? There were 700 students in attendance at this debate. And I had to argue for 45 minutes, and he argued for 45 minutes, and then we had an hour and a half of Q&A, and it was crazy. It was like 99.9% pro-choice, and they were radical. It was a little scary at times on the stage, right? But one of the arguments that Malcolm Potts made was he said, I stopped doing abortions when the neurological system is fully developed, because at that point I believe you've got a full human person. So I got up there, this is during the Q&A, they asked him if there was ever a time he wouldn't do abortions. And I said, that's interesting, Dr. Potts. And I said to the students, does anybody know when the neurological system is fully developed? Anybody? 20 weeks? Yeah, these kids were like 3 months, 6 months in the womb. I was like, no, you're way off. It's when you're at least 21 or 22 years old. Yeah? So I was like, whose side do you want to be on? Mine or his right now? Okay? Because according to Dr. Potts, he'd still abort you, man. If I were you, I would run, Bambi, run. Get out of this classroom. Okay? Follow me to the nearest exit. Okay? And afterwards, these kids came up to me. I had a group of about 50 kids around me who wanted to know answers. They wanted to see the consistency of my arguments. Well, what about rape and incest? Well, what about life of the mother? Well, what about disabilities? Well, what about... They were really intrigued with my arguments. And they wanted to see if I could apply my arguments consistently in all these other scenarios. And most of them were guys, by the way. Right? About 80% of them were guys. And at the very end, 2 of them came up to me and they said, we're pro-life. And we think that we're really glad you're here. Thanks, bye. And they ran. I was like, come on, you guys. That was nice. But what was really exciting was when I had that big group, they were really testing me and they said, what about overpopulation? I said, really, you guys? Don't be afraid of those arguments. Even if you don't have all those myths and facts and statistics and things, use your head. Use your logic. Really, you guys? You guys go to Berkeley. I went to the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Nobody even knows where that is, okay? You're going to Berkeley, and you're telling me you're using the same solution for overpopulation that my grandparents did, just kill babies? Really? You can't think of any other solutions to hydroponic farming than the solutions that have been hand-fed to you by older generations? And they were like, there's hydroponic farming. I'm like, yeah, hydroponic farming. Okay, that's underwater farming, right? I'm like, cool, come up with solutions that don't have to kill people because you know that's a human being. And it was amazing how these guys felt challenged them, right? The arguments that you give to show people why you are pro-life should not be about that gotcha moment when you give the perfect story that shows them that they were wrong. It should be the moment when you turn them on and make them realize, I had an insight. I can solve this problem. Dignify them. Give them a joyful reason for why you are pro-life. Not, haha, I crushed your argument, be pro-life. Because all they're going to do is go home and be mad at you and maybe even hate you. And that doesn't work for anybody. Okay? So anyway, so that's a really important principle, but can you see how nobody's going to care about our principles of ethics if they don't believe it's a human person? And nobody's going to care about whether it's a human person if they don't believe about the principle of beneficence. Do good with your life. They won't care. That's why that first principle is so important. Finally, that leads us to a bunch of principles of justice. Okay? These principles of justice come from ethics. They all kind of come from each other. Beneficence makes us care about whether or not you're a human person and what that means. Being a human person, those principles of logic makes us care about being ethical, treating people in the right way. Principles of ethics, right and wrong, makes us care about setting up social structures in our society that are just and fair to others. And those are principles of justice. And the first one is called the principle of natural rights. And it started with Suarez, John Locke, Jefferson, and Thomas Paine. And Francisco Suarez was a Spanish Jesuit Catholic priest who lived about the same time, mid-1550s, as Bartolomé de las Casas. Right? And he was arguing against the Spanish courts that were saying that you could displace great masses of people from their homes, poor people, if you wanted to build an aqueduct or a road or something else. And it didn't matter what happened to them, even if they died, because human beings were subject to the state. And what was really important was the common good over the individual person. And Francisco Suarez said, no. The individual human person has rights that supersede any notion of the common good, because the common good is based on the rights of the human person. And the whole place that the government, the whole area that the government gets its raison d'etre, its reason for existence, is from the moral dignity and value of the individual human person which it serves. Therefore, if you undermine the rights of the human person, you undermine the legitimacy of the state. And it was the first articulation of a right. In Latin, he used the word jus, J-U-S, a right. And it totally changed the way that people viewed human justice, human relationships, and the relationship between people and the state. And this is where later we get our notion of inalienable rights. And it says human beings in themselves, by virtue of their mere existence, possess natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Right? And the state can't take these away. It's not possible because they're part of your nature. The state can violate them. Other people can violate them, but you cannot take away someone's right to life or liberty or property because they're part of your nature. You need those conditions in order to thrive as a human being. Those conditions are natural to you. But now we need another principle because people say, wait a minute, I have the inalienable right to liberty. And that means you just said that you can violate it, but that would be wrong, right? So, therefore, I have the right to liberty. And so I should have the right to possession over my own body. And so therefore, abortion should be a right. Well, there's a couple of problems, not the least of which is that it's not your own body. And we can prove that. But there's another problem with that. It's called the principle of the hierarchy of rights. Whenever you have a conflict between two inalienable rights, how do you resolve that conflict? You can do one of two things. You can do it arbitrarily and subjectively. Right? You can say, oh, I'm more powerful. So therefore, my liberty interest is more important than yours, and it will win in the court of law. But that is arbitrary and subjective, and someday when you are no longer powerful, but you are weak, then someone will claim that you no longer have a right to life in order for them to exercise the right to liberty. It is a very dangerous, extrinsic way to view rights. Or you could use this method. The hierarchy of rights notices something about those rights. some of those rights are necessary for the very possibility of the existence of the other right. Which right is necessary for the possibility of the right of the other? Liberty or property? Which one is necessary for the existence of the other? Liberty is necessary for the existence of property, right? Because if I own you, who owns all your property? I do, by default, right? So liberty is called a more fundamental right. If we have an argument, your property versus my liberty, right? We live at the top of a hill, and my road gets blocked by a windstorm and a tree, and I can't get down it. So my liberty is at issue, and I want to get down the hill, right? So I want to use your road, but you put a gate up and say it's my property. You can't get down. Ha ha ha. The government will say you have to let her down. They will force an easement on your property so that I can get down, because my liberty is a higher right, not a more important right. All three are equally important, but it's a more fundamental right. It's necessary for the existence of the property right. Same thing with life. Which is more necessary for the possibility of the other, life or liberty? Life. And this is why life has to take priority in any rights conflict. Not because we don't think a woman's liberty is important, but because the life right is necessary for the mere possibility of the liberty and trust. Now, here's my point. My point is this. Rights don't matter to people who don't have a sense of right and wrong. Ethics don't matter to people who don't have a notion of the intrinsic dignity of the human person. The intrinsic dignity of the human person doesn't matter to people who don't even know what a person is. And the facts about what a human person is and that the unborn child is a full human person doesn't matter to somebody who doesn't live by the principle of beneficence. Do good with your life before the good of others. The single most important thing you can do with your life as a pro-lifer is to help people live for others above themselves. And that's not hard. I could teach you a bunch of statistics and facts and stories to tell at the right moment, but you're going to forget them. You're not going to forget this. How to tell people that what matters, that what makes them dignified, is their ability to give to others. So I want to close with this simple little, what I call a little schema of happiness, and then I'm going to open you up for questions. We have about 10 minutes for questions at the end. We have a system called the 4 levels of happiness. Let's skip to that one. At the very end, there we go. There are 4 different ways you could view the meaning and purpose of your life. Okay? You can view the meaning of your life in terms of physical pleasure and possessions. That's all that life is about. That's what makes me happy. And if you do that, the principle of beneficence goes out the window. Who cares about sacrificing myself for others when the meaning of my life is physical pleasure and possessions, food and alcohol and drugs and getting what I want and sex when I want it? Okay? But if you do that, you're going to end up bored, empty, right, and shattered. And we have ways of helping people see this. And most people kind of know it. They just need you to guide them through it. The second level of happiness is a little higher. It's deeper. It's more fulfilling. It's longer lasting. It uses more of your powers. The ego gratification. Happiness that comes from independence, winning, being popular, being powerful, being better than others, discovering your skills and your talents. It's not a bad level. Neither is level 1. You need to eat and drink and procreate, right? These things are important. But they become killers when you live for them as the end of your life instead of a means to a greater end, and you need to help people see that. We're killing ourselves with level 1 and level 2. When you live for the meaning of life as if it were all about power, success, independence, me, you will end up disappointed, frustrated, shattered, empty, aggressive, bitter, angry, jealous, and holding other people in contempt. That sounds like a living hell to me. It doesn't sound like happiness. Our culture is stuck on level 1 and 2. That's where we are. Yeah, you'll get some really cool McDonald's commercials every now and then that are all about level 3 and 4, or at least level 3, right? But usually what we're learning in the media and popular culture and the fashion industry and business and education, and sometimes sadly even in our churches, is level 1 and 2 is where it's all at. And it's killing us, you guys. It's killing our definition of freedom. It's killing our definition of success. It's killing our definition of quality of life and what real love is. And it's smashing all the principles that are important for a culture and a civilization and happiness. Happiness level 3 is to do the good beyond yourself for the benefit of someone else. And level 4 is to surrender ourselves to ultimate good itself, to God, to unconditional love. Your job is to move people into levels 3 and 4. And you can do that. It's not hard. It's as easy as this. One day I was in the department store, and I was shopping. I think it was in Macy's in Seattle. I'm in South Dakota now. I love South Dakota. It was 20 below last week. Anyway, so I was in Seattle. I was at a department store, and I'm going through the clothes, and there's this young teenage high school girl, and she was getting ready for the prom, and she's trying to pick out a dress, and her mom was there, and they were having this big fight over this dress. She's holding up this skinky thing, and she's like, "Oh, Mom, I got to wear this. It's so beautiful." Her mom's like, "You're not wearing that. That's gross," right? It showed everything, and I'm kind of inching my way over there, just kind of listening. I'm like trying to sort of just listen. And she starts crying. She's so mad at her mom, and her mom's just so frustrated with her, and she didn't want to give in, though, to her daughter because she loves her daughter. And so she walks away from her mom, so I kind of go the other way. And I went up to her, and I said, "Honey, can I tell you something?" And the teenage girl goes, she's like shocked. She's like, "Yeah." And I said, "I just want you to know your mom's right. You want to know why? Because you're worth a lot more than that outfit says you are." That's all you have to say, right? And I'll tell you something, those words will come to you when your hour comes. 3 most important things you can do. Take this away from my talk. Number 1, pray. Pray that God will give you the words you need when your hour comes. Number 2, don't be afraid to do this. Okay? Approach people. And number 3, if you forget everything else I just taught you about all these amazing 10 principles, first of all, bring us to your school and we'll do a training. We could go through it again. But secondly, just remember those levels of happiness. Move people out of level 1 and 2 and into 3 and 4. If you can do that, you've done more for the pro-life movement than anything else you could possibly do. So I'm going to open up for questions now. Thank you. She's got a microphone here. Oh, that way everybody else can hear you too.
There we go.
Raise your hand if you also have a question. Let me see. Okay, so you can come and get in line. Yeah, if you've got a question, come in line. Thanks, Michael. Okay. Yeah, about 8 minutes.
More of an example. You said those girls were coming up to you after your talk saying, "Can you do this for the rape argument? Can you do this for the life of the mother?" Could you just give us one example of like the rape argument?
Yeah, sure. So somebody says, "What would you do?" Stay up here. You didn't get to get off that easy. Stay up here. So you make the argument. Go ahead, make the argument. I'll show you.
What about women who were raped or incest?
What do you think should happen to them?
Well, I know what I think.
Right, tell me. Well, no, you're playing the devil.
Okay.
You're the other side. Okay.
Well, I know.
This has got to be interesting, right? So be the other side. Okay.
I know it's really hard to think of something. I don't think that woman should have to suffer with that baby. I know I didn't say that in my head.
Yeah, if she's pregnant, you don't want her to suffer. That's why
Right.
you want her to be able to have an abortion.
Right.
And I commend you for not wanting her to suffer because I think that's good. And I'm with you on that. But I want you to think about 2 things. Number 1, that is a baby. It's a human being and it's a human life and it's hers. And we can't do a wrong in order to make it right. We should never violate the principle of the ends don't justify the means. I think that's a really dangerous thing to do. But number 2, why are we telling women that they're worth so little, that we think so little of them, that we don't think that they can suffer for something greater than themselves? Wow. Really? I mean, we commend men when they sacrifice themselves for their families, but we tell women, if you have to sacrifice yourself, get an abortion. I think that is degrading to women. I think women are worth more than that, and I think they are very capable of giving themselves out of compassion and love to something bigger than themselves, even in a desperate moment like rape.
Wow.
By the way, the worst thing that you can do, and I have seen women do this, is to pretend like you've been raped, right? So that you can empathize with the woman. Don't do that. Don't ever do that, right? You don't have to do that. Your empathy comes from your ability to love, okay? Not from your experiences. Okay, yeah.
Awesome. So I was really interested in what you were saying about like the potential and like people's personhood and like the potential of it. So my question would be, right, like a sperm cell or like an egg cell, like that has the potential to become a human, but it doesn't have the same personhood as like once they're united and it's like a fertilized.
Yes.
So what would your answer be like to that?
You just answered your own question. That's exactly right. The sperm is not a human person because it has the potential to become one, right? The egg has the potential to become a human person, but the ova, once the sperm has fertilized the egg, it no longer has the potential to become a human person. It is a human person, and here's why. Because at the moment of fertilization, that being contains all of the information necessary to actualize its nature the way human beings actualize. If you give it time and energy, it will eventually show the same desires that you and I have, same transcendent desires. If you let an egg grow to its natural fulfillment, it will never seek to build little churches and schools and things like that, right? It doesn't do that because it doesn't have any of those kinds of potential power. It doesn't have those powers. The egg has as its ultimate fulfillment to be fertilized by a sperm. That's how you define it. The sperm has as its ultimate fulfillment to fertilize an egg. If these two do not reach their natural fulfillment, they die and get sloughed out of the body. But a fertilized egg has as its natural, ultimate fulfillment transcendent desires, just like you do. How do I know? Leave it alone and watch it grow. All you have to give it is food and maybe some education, and it'll show very good evidence of desiring the same things that you and I do.
Thank you.
Hi. I was also really interested in that that point that she brought up, and I was wondering if we value human beings based off of their like potential. What would you say to someone who argued that someone with like a disability who isn't really going to change to reach like full human potential in terms of like health and that? How would you argue that?
That's a very good question. I would say, well, what do you think is full human potential?
Well, I guess I know what I think. Are you asking me to play devil?
Yeah, if someone were to say full human potential is the ability to walk and talk and move around and have a certain level of intellectual thought, I would say, well, that's interesting, but that's not really going to leave you fulfilled, is it? I mean, do you really think that the fulfillment of your dignified, beautiful, amazing life is to walk around and talk? That's it? Because I think more of you than that. I think the fulfillment of your life is your ability to love, to know God, to give yourself away, to enjoy beautiful music, to enjoy the transcendent. And I will tell you that children with the most profound disabilities show evidence of that capacity.
Yeah.
And even when they don't, I can't judge them. I don't know whether or not they're having some kind of a transcendent experience that we can't see because it's not material, it's transcendent. And so I think that what we do is err on the side of protecting, do no harm. Yeah.
Thank you.
What's one thing you wish you knew at our age?
I wish I knew my husband at your age. I didn't get married till I was 38. Where were you, honey? No, I'm kidding. I know what you mean by that question. That is a very good question. I wish that I would have known that I had the power within me to change people without trying to prove something. Because the way that I approached pro-life when I was in college, not a bad way, because when you're in college, you're zealous and excited and you want to do something radical and crazy. My way was I would get the unborn baby pictures of dead babies, right? And I would stuff them in the faculty mailboxes. I got in really big trouble for that one. But it wasn't about trying to change the faculty, it was about me. I wish that I would have known I had the power in me to change people just through love. Right? Just through making a difference and showing them who they really were instead of trying to feel like I had to crush their arguments and smash them. That's what I wish I would have known.
Thank you.
Okay, real quick.
Hey, I think this is the last
Is
one.
there any way that we can get this PowerPoint you've been reading from? Like, do you have it linked anywhere?
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. On my table, the Healing the Culture booth, I have a sheet with all of these principles laid out and examples of how they apply. So if you can't get one of those sheets, go to my website, healingtheculture.org, and then you can download under Learn. There's free resources, and these 10 principles are on a sheet that you can download. If you want this actual PowerPoint, email me, and I can send it to you. I'll take out the pictures of my kids. There's some pictures of my kids in there. Aw, sorry. Just kidding. Okay, one more.
Okay, so I was gonna say, if somebody asked you like, what's the difference between like, when is a human being like become a human being? Like, when does the egg become an actual human being and have that potential? And you were to say, like, use the mammal example of like saying, well, mammals are, they are at conception, they are the full potential of a mammal. Then, like, what's the difference between, like, we eat mammals, we'll like kill and eat mammals. what's the difference between that and a human being? And say I wasn't like Catholic or anything.
Good question. So I would say that, let's take, for example, an elephant, right, or a pig. That pig is a pig with the full potentiality of pigness at the moment of fertilization. Right, he already is a pig. He's just not an adult pig. He's an embryonic pig. So he already is pigness, just like you have already got personness when you've got that sperm fertilizing the egg, right? But a pig or an elephant is a different type of being than a human person because it doesn't have the transcendent nature that we do. So it has value and it has worth, but it doesn't have the infinite value and worth that you have because you have the capacity to lay down your life as a sacrifice for someone else and to relate to unconditional love himself. Now, if you can show me evidence that the elephant or the pig has that same transcendent nature, I would fight for its rights as vigorously as I do human beings. But I just don't see evidence of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much.